Hello, and thank you for taking the time to listen to our presentation today. My name is Chelsea Carbocas, and I lead our patient advocacy team at Taysha Gene Therapies. Our team is responsible first and foremost for integrating your perspectives into the work that we do internally at Taysha. Before we dive into today's presentation, it's important to note that we're talking about an investigational gene therapy product. Until clinical trials have been completed and regulatory agencies potentially approve a product, we can't make any claims about the potential safety or efficacy of an investigational product. Our goal today is just simply to educate you about our investigational clinical trial. So I'll kick things off by sharing some background information about Taysha and who we are. Next, my colleague Kristen will share some of the insights that she and her team gathered that helped to inform the clinical trial. And finally, my colleague, Dr. Suyash Prasad, will walk you through our investigational gene therapy approach for Rett syndrome. He'll also provide an overview of the first clinical trial in adults and highlight our planned next steps, including the path to beginning trials in pediatrics and males. So what does Taysha mean? Well, our CEO actually asked his daughter to name the company. They're based in Texas, and she had just been in class learning about the Caddo Native American language. She immediately suggested the name Taysha. There are actually two meanings behind the name Taysha. The first is that it means Texas, which is where we are headquartered. And the second is that it translates to ally or friend. And this really represents our commitment to being an ally to the Rett community. We believe that only by working together with the community can we accomplish things that have never been done before. Taysha's sole focus is on the development of gene therapies for rare monogenic diseases of the central nervous system, such as Rett syndrome. Our strategy builds upon a delivery mechanism called AAV9, which Suyash will speak to more later in the presentation. And all of our approaches are designed to target the underlying cause of a disease. So I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge our commitment to the Rett community. We've partnered with many of the patient advocacy groups to be sure we're answering as many of the questions that you may have as possible today. With that said, there are certain things that we can and cannot share as a publicly traded company. We understand that time is extremely important to the community, and our entire team works with that urgency in mind. However, there are many processes involved in drug development, including regulatory, clinical, and ethical considerations that we must adhere to. So thank you for understanding that we may not have all of the answers today, but we'll do our best to share information as we can. Before I hand it over to my colleague, Kristen, to share some of what we've learned from the community thus far, I want to highlight our general approach to engaging with the community. We understand that you are the experts that live with or care for someone with Rett syndrome day in and day out. We strive to connect with you to learn as much as we can from you. Through hearing your perspectives thus far, we've been able to identify what would be the most meaningful endpoints to select in our clinical trial, what educational information might you need regarding gene therapy, regarding a clinical trial in general, and what are some of the ways that we could reduce the burden on those who participate in a clinical trial. Thank you to all of you who have engaged with us thus far and shared your perspectives. We look forward to speaking with more of you in the future. So please welcome our Head of Patient Experience, Kristen Phillips. Thank you.
Thank you, Chelsea. Many of you listening today contributed to this research. Thank you for sharing your perspective and experience with us. I am grateful to now have the opportunity to share our findings with the Rett community and how what we learned from you influenced our clinical trial protocol. Understanding the daily impact of a chronic disease is key to patient-focused drug development. With this in mind, we set out to explore the perspectives of caregivers of adults with Rett syndrome and to inform the clinical development of an investigational gene therapy. The research was conducted in two parts. 142 caregivers of adults with Rett syndrome across 4 countries completed a multiple choice survey on symptom progression, quality of life, and disease management. And to gather detailed qualitative insights, 7 U.S. caregivers of adults with Rett syndrome also participated in an in-depth, open-ended survey, journaling exercises, an online discussion forum, and a moderated video focus group. What we learned is that by adulthood, individuals with Rett syndrome have experienced or are experiencing a wide range of symptoms. And for many, their existing symptoms tended to worsen in adulthood. The symptoms that caregivers considered to have the greatest impact on quality of life were loss of speech and loss of purposeful hand use. And the impact that these losses have on families are illustrated in these two quotes. If you had hands and no voice, you could still do sign language, use an adaptive speech device with ease. To lose both is tragic. Also, to be able to feed oneself would be huge. The loss of speech has taken away independence, choice, ability to advocate for herself, and inform us about her health. The other symptoms that ranked highest with respect to quality of life impact included seizures and Rett episodes, gastrointestinal issues, and loss of ability to walk independently. With any treatment, caregivers want to see significant changes in these symptoms, but we also learned that even incremental or small improvements would be considered meaningful. The Taysha gene therapy protocol was designed with these insights in mind. Key endpoints were selected to reflect caregivers' desired improvements. For example, the revised motor behavior assessment will evaluate communication and motor function. Hand function will be assessed using the Rett Syndrome Hand Function Scale. And GI issues will be evaluated using the gastrointestinal health questionnaire. In addition, daily diaries on seizures and Rett episodes will capture day-to-day changes seen over the course of the trial. With that, I'm happy to introduce Dr. Suyash Prasad, Taysha's Chief Medical Officer, who will discuss the REVEAL adult study in greater detail. Suyash?
Well, hello, my name is Suyash Prasad. I'm a pediatrician and I'm currently the Chief Medical Officer and Head of Research Development at Taysha Gene Therapies. It's my pleasure to follow on from Kristen and Chelsea and talk with you a little bit about the science behind our Rett gene therapy program and talk to you a little bit about the plans for the clinical trial. Firstly, let me tell you a bit about gene therapy. How does gene therapy work? Well, for certain genetic diseases, there is a gene that's missing, and the gene codes for a particular protein. And the protein has an action in the body. It could be a structural protein such as collagen, which forms part of your skin, or it could be a protein that is an enzyme that is involved in physiological activity within the body. But essentially, genes code for proteins that do things in the body. And if you have a genetic mutation in the particular protein that's missing, you will then lose a function within the body, and that will then result in a particular clinical condition. And the point of gene therapy is to try and replace the protein that's missing by actually replacing the gene that codes for the particular protein. So our intent is to replace a protein that's missing. The protein that's missing in Rett is MECP2. We're trying to replace the DNA that codes for the protein that's missing with our gene therapy approach. So specifically with Rett syndrome, what is the underlying cause? Well, the underlying cause is a lack of the protein MECP2, MECP2. And as you all know, this is a protein that is integrally involved in the development and functioning of the brain. One of the curious things about MECP2 is that Rett syndrome, of course, has too little MECP2, but one of the challenges of developing a gene therapy for Rett syndrome is that if you have too much MECP2 on the other side, that can be toxic. This is what's known as a Goldilocks disease, where you have to have just the right amount of protein, just the right amount of MECP2. Too little and you get Rett syndrome. Too much and you end up with another condition known as MECP2 duplication syndrome that's related to too much or an overexpression of MECP2. So you have to have just the right amount of MECP2. So our approach to treating Rett syndrome is to deliver a working copy of the MECP2 gene to affected cells. The way we do this is that we are able to produce the DNA, the gene that codes for MECP2, the genetic material that codes for the protein MECP2, and we wrap it up into what's known as a vector capsid. This is basically a viral shell. It's a shell that packages the genetic material. And the reason we use a viral shell is that viruses are very good at getting into all different types of tissues in the body. We inject millions and millions and millions of particles of these viral shells containing the DNA that codes for MECP2 into the body. We give the drug with an intrathecal injection, which is essentially into the fluid that surrounds the spinal canal, the spinal cord, and the brain. And that way, the genetic material can enter the brain cells using the viral capsid. And once within the brain cell, the DNA emerges from the capsid and starts producing the protein that's missing, MECP2, and hopefully will replace the protein to the point where we start to see clinical benefit in patients, children, and adults with Rett syndrome. Let me tell you a bit about the clinical trial now. This is known as the REVEAL study, and it's a multi-center phase 1/2 open label dose escalation study. There's a lot of words there, but multi-center means it's going to be running in several centers around the world. A phase 1/2 study means it's early in clinical development. It's essentially the first gene therapy clinical trial for Rett syndrome. Dose escalation means we'll be trialing more than one dose in the study, and it's going to be taking place in adult females with Rett syndrome. We're trying to understand the safety of the product and, most importantly, the clinical effectiveness or the efficacy of this gene therapy product. If we go to the next slide, I can confirm that we're looking at 2 separate doses. The first dose is known as the initial dose or the starting dose, which we actually expect based on the animal studies to be both safe and effective. This is a dose of 5e14 vector genomes total VG delivered intrathecally. And then the higher dose cohort is the 1e15 total vector genome or total VG dose. So the first patients, of course, will be dosed with the lower dose, the 5e14 total VG. And patients enrolling in the study are going to be randomized, i.e. chosen to go either onto drug immediately, the gene therapy treatment now, or the gene therapy after a period of time. That is known as the delayed treatment cohort. And the reason we do this is that we want to have in the first cohort of patients a group of patients who are on gene therapy and also a group of patients who are concurrently being monitored but are not yet on the gene therapy. So we get a good comparison of patients who are on gene therapy and those that are not. And then the patients who are in the delayed treatment control arm will, at some future time point, likely 9 to 12 months after the study starts, they'll then be given the gene therapy drug after a delayed period of time. Now, you can't choose which arm you go onto. It's entirely random. And that's one of the, from a statistical perspective, it adds robustness to the study to bring in this element of randomization. What are the potential benefits and risks of the adult study? Well, we do as much as we can to model out and understand potential benefits and risks from animal studies and work in the laboratory. And we've been working closely with regulators to make sure that the risks are reduced as much as possible before we start the clinical trial. Having said that, we can't reduce the risk to zero. So there are certainly risks to taking part. It is an investigational new drug that's never been given to a human before, if by replacing MECP2, you're able to see improvements in the clinical features of Rett syndrome, then that will be quite a significant achievement. In terms of how the study progresses, the study as a whole actually takes several years to run, but we will have a much sooner idea of whether the treatment is working, to what degree the treatment is working, and how safe the treatment is. This particular slide with the arrow and the dots outlines really in some granular detail how patients who enter the study will be managed. So the blue dot shows you where we have a screening or a baseline visit. This essentially is to see if you're eligible for the study. There's then a period of time, a period of observation before you then get dosed with a gene therapy drug. That is the yellow dot. And while you're being dosed, you actually need to be in hospital for about 3 days to get all the assessments done and to make sure we can give the drug safely, and to monitor you for a period of time after the administration of the gene therapy drug. You then will have weekly follow-ups, and then that will spread to monthly follow-ups. And then as the study progresses, there'll be longer and longer periods between the observations. And at each observation time point, you will go into hospital. You'll have a number of blood tests taken, and a number of tests will be done to understand how your symptoms of Rett syndrome are changing or not, as the case may be. Now, eligibility criteria, this really relates to who is eligible to enter the study. And as I say, this first study will be performed in adult females with Rett syndrome. The vast majority of patients in that age category will be eligible, but of course there are certain reasons why a patient may not be eligible. For example, if a patient has Rett syndrome plus another health condition that is significant, they may not be eligible for to be an initial patient in this study. But that's a discussion that if you're interested in taking part in the study, you'll need to have with the investigator or the clinician who's running the study at the site that you intend to take part in the study. So as I say, when we think about who's eligible, who's not eligible, patients who are female, greater than 18 years of age, they need to have Rett syndrome, of course, with a documented mutation in MECP2. This is really important. We need to make sure that you actually have a mutation in the MECP2 gene, because if you think about it, that's the gene we're trying to replace with this intended treatment. It is a complicated study, and for any gene therapy study, there is a lot of monitoring that needs to take place. For that reason, you'll be required to stay close to the hospital. So within about a 45-minute or an hour's journey to the hospital, so you can be monitored quickly and efficiently. And if there's some kind of unplanned or unanticipated side effect, you're able to get to the clinician in the treating center relatively quickly. Now, certain patients are excluded. I've already mentioned, for example, if you have a significant serious illness, then that may preclude you from entering the study, certainly at this stage, or if you have any contraindications to a lumbar puncture or spinal infusion, for example, a very severe scoliosis, that may preclude you from entering the study if the CSF flow is interrupted in some way. But that will be assessed during the initial eligibility and screening period for the study. In terms of locations for the study, as I say, it's a multi-center study, so there'll be many sites, several sites around the world who will be taking part in the study. The first active clinical trial site is based in Canada. Usually with the way these multi-center studies start, you start off with one site, a second site opens up, a third site opens up. So we are in the process of opening up a number of sites. But as I say, the first site to be open is in Canada. We are in the process of adding a second site in Canada, and we'll be opening up sites in additional countries in the near future. I want to reiterate the fact that it is a commitment taking part in the study. There's a high level of commitment needed, not just from the patient, but from the caregivers and the family around them. You will need to relocate to the site of the hospital for a period of time. And it's important to be close to the center, really, in case there's any issue that crops up that needs you to speak to the clinician and their team relatively quickly. Now, we at Taysha will, of course, cover the costs and the fees for accommodations and all the costs for the study. And we have certain vendors in place that manage those kinds of travel situations and any additional costs that you may have to relocate and actually be in a location away from home. Those costs will be met, so that's not something you need to worry about. And we can share more details on those operational logistics if and when the time comes for us to have that discussion with you as an individual potential patient. Now, it is a relatively small study to start off with. There is a plan to have up to 18 patients in this initial study. And you can see here on this slide, we have information, an email address for you to get more information on the study. So it's our medical information email address, so please feel free to contact them if you specifically want to be kept abreast of any updates on the actual study itself. In terms of plans for the broader Rett community, because as I mentioned, this is a study that's going to start in adult females, we actually know that there's a significant number of children, pediatric females with Rett syndrome that could potentially benefit. And our intent is to start a study for that group of individuals really quite quickly. So we are actively working hard to get that site up and running, and we will keep you all abreast as and when that might happen. In addition, we do know there's a small number of pediatric males with quite severe disease, and we understand this is a really significant unmet need in the Rett community. And we are planning also to run a study in the boys with Rett. Of course, this will generally be the younger boys with quite significantly serious symptoms. We do have a protocol synopsis written, and we're in the process of writing a draft protocol for that. And our intent is to run that study too. We're not sure about timings for that, but it will certainly be after we start the pediatric girls study. So watch this space for a pediatric boys study as well. So on this particular slide, you can see that we're going to start the adult female study. Whilst that is running, and after we've dosed a small number of adults, we will then start the Rett pediatric female study, and then thereafter we'll start the much smaller study, because there are far fewer boys with Rett around. We'll start the Rett pediatric male study.
Thank you, Siyash. As I mentioned earlier, it is crucial for us to hear from the patient community, the patient advocacy groups, and other subject matter experts as we build out our clinical trials. With your expertise, we've been able to shape the trial so that it's hopefully more meaningful to patients and families, and hopefully reduces the burden on those who participate. We look forward to continuing to integrate your feedback as the program moves forward. With that, I'd like to thank all of the Rett patient advocacy groups that helped us to build this presentation today. We hope we answered some of the questions that you may have. We'd like to thank our colleagues at UT Southwestern, and last but not least, we'd like to thank the Rett community for your willingness to partner with us to drive research forward. If you have any questions or would like to connect with us further, please reach out to my colleagues at medinfo@tayshagtx.com. Thank you.